Welcome back to Tocqueville Talks. I am here today co-hosting without my usual co-host, Brent Nelson, who is away traveling this summer. I am Beth L'Arrivée, and it is July 6th. So that means that America has just celebrated its 250th anniversary. July 4th happened this past Saturday, a very hot day, and there were fireworks, air shows in various cities. There were tall ships all around the New York harbor. And I am here today to talk with Rob L'Arrivée again, who has been here a few times before on the podcast, to talk about Tocqueville and patriotism and the 4th of July. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for inviting me yet again.
And you are, I forgot to introduce you, you are a political science professor here at Furman University.
Yeah, I teach political theory.
We're going to talk about American patriotism, and what I remember in Tocqueville, in Democracy in America, is that there are two kinds of patriotism. Do I have that right?
Yeah, a instinctive patriotism and a reflective patriotism, which Tocqueville sees exercised in the United States.
So we had an event a while back on American patriotism for the Tocqueville Center, and we had 3 guests. It was an on-discourse event. The audience was presented with different viewpoints, and then they had a chance to discuss amongst themselves these various viewpoints. And we had Marion Strobel here from Furman, and we had Akan Malichi, who is also here from Furman, and we had Esau McCauley. They all presented different views of patriotism, and there was a lot of audience participation. It was exciting. I remember it was very well participated in. The audience loved to talk about patriotism, and there was a lot of debate, a lot of enthusiasm from the audience. Tocqueville himself was able to experience that American enthusiasm about patriotism firsthand when he came over by being able to attend a July 4th parade. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's really an exciting story. Tocqueville and Beaumont were traveling from New York City to Albany in early July on a steamboat called the North America. In fact, Tocqueville didn't know this, but his steamboat was racing another steamboat, which was very dangerous, which feels kind of American to me, these 2 steamboats racing down the river. His steamboat won. He had the really exciting opportunity to actually join the procession in the 4th of July celebration in Albany. Tocqueville and Beaumont recount that in the procession, there were politicians. Also, many of the businesses had their own kind of little floats that were part of it as well. And the procession ended at a Methodist church where the Declaration of Independence was read. We see here all different elements of society. We have the economic actors in industry. We have the politicians. We have religion as part of the 4th of July celebration. And so all these different associations are represented. In fact, Beaumont says representatives of all the industrial and commercial trades carried banners bearing the names of their organizations. It would be easy to ridicule banners with inscriptions such as Butchers Association, Apprentices Association, etc. But when you think about it, you realize that it is only natural that a nation that owes its prosperity to trade and industry should honor such symbols. I am reading from Olivier Zuhn's The Man Who Understood Democracy, The Life of Alexis de Tocqueville, pages 50 to 51. And remember, he gave a lovely talk at the Tocqueville Center, and you can find his talk on the website.
Yeah, it was one of my favorite talks. He was amazing.
At the height of the celebration, Tocqueville just loves listening to the Declaration of Independence read by a pastor. He says, in this remembrance an entire people of their nation's inception, in this unison of the present generation, with a generation that has passed away, but whose generous passions everyone briefly shared. In all this, there was something deeply felt and truly grand.
What's so funny about this is that you and I are also foreigners. We're from Canada originally, and we've lived in the U.S. for a while. And we lived in a tiny town in New York, near Albany, a couple hours from Albany, called Hamilton. And our kids had their standards set for 4th of July celebrations there because we were invited to be part of the local town parade. So we got to sit on a float, and the kids got to throw candy at everyone. and experience exactly that spirit that Tocqueville was talking about.
Yeah, it was pretty fun as Canadian citizens to be part of a 4th of July parade and throw candy as we're going down the street. Weren't you part of a 4th of July event where you and the kids were actually the most patriotic dressed people?
We went to a tiny town parade here in South Carolina when we first moved down here. The kids always insisted on dressing in red, white, and blue. They're all American citizens. They're actually dual citizens. But they really love the 4th of July. And so we went down and we found this parade, the tiniest, most nondescript parade I have ever experienced. And we were by far the most patriotic of all the people who attended because we had our flags and our pinwheels and our clothing. And so we actually got in the local newspaper, featured us in the story on the parade because of how patriotic we looked.
Now I have something exciting.
Oh?
Yeah. I thought, well, that's interesting that Tocqueville and Beaumont were invited to be part of the 4th of July procession. That's notable. I mean, you have two visitors from France. They're meeting the politicians in Albany, so they invite them to the float. And I thought, that's noteworthy. I wonder if the Albany newspaper mentioned this. So guess what I did?
Did you look up the papers?
I went through newspapers from 1831, and I found something in the Albany Argus. It says, the national anniversary was celebrated in this city on Monday with great and unusual splendor, a clear sky and favorable weather, the general emulation of the citizens, and the extensive arrangements of the different societies and associations gave an effect and brilliancy to the occasion worthy of a day so memorable in the annals of liberty. That's how the newspaper article starts. Two things I love. Liberty is capitalized. Mm-hmm. It's just, different associations and societies. It's like straight out of Tocqueville. It is, composed of various associations. I love that. But it goes on. It also says that Count de Beaumont, M. de Roqueville, and M. Shearer from France, then in the city, in the procession of their commission to examine and report upon our prisons and prison discipline, were invited and accepted a place in the line.
They were in there. They made it into the paper.
They made
That's
it into
amazing.
the newspaper from 1831.
Monsieur de Roqueville?
Well, it's hard to read the scans of the newspaper, but it says Roqueville.
But that's got to be Tocqueville.
Well,
it's clearly Tocqueville.
It's either Beaumont or Beaumeat, but it looks like Beaumont and Tocqueville. They're French. They're visiting the city, and we know on that day. And they were in America to report upon prisons and prison discipline.
That's right.
Which is what the newspaper says. And I thought that was really fascinating because he describes this 4th of July procession, and we have independent evidence in the newspaper, confirming everything he said.
All right. Well, I can't tell you how ecstatic I am to hear that. Not only do we have it in common with Tocqueville that we were able as foreigners to participate in a 4th of July parade in America, but also that we made the town newspaper. That's amazing. So could you tell us more about Tocqueville's two kinds of patriotism, the instinctive and the reflective? What are they each, and how are they different?
In Volume 1, Part 2, Chapter 6 of Democracy in America, he discusses the public spirit in the United States. The first form of patriotism or love of country he describes as follows. There exists a love of country that has its source principally in the unthinking, disinterested, and indefinable sentiment that binds the heart of the man to the places where the man was born. This form of instinctive patriotism, he points out, is prevalent in monarchies, but notice his language that it's instinctual. It's not really thinking or reflective. It's natural, not only because it's based in a natural instinctual response, but also it's tied to where you were born. Hence, that's a natural beginning. Along with that comes respect for ancestors, a taste for the ancient customs, respect for the memory of the past, and even a sort of sweetness in being obedient to the laws.
Okay, so this sounds universal. This sounds like something that you could find as easily in Plato as in Tocqueville. And I have experienced it, obviously, being from Canada, have that instinctive attachment to the flag, for one, like the maple leaf and everything that represents. It represents maple syrup. It represents beautiful natural landscapes. It represents hockey. No matter what, whenever I see that, even if it's just on a bottle of maple syrup at the store here in America, I can't help but feel some sort of affection for that. Are Americans like everyone else in their instinctive patriotism, or does it manifest differently, or does he talk about that at all?
He actually points out that America is more indicative of a kind of reflective patriotism. Instinctive patriotism, which is true, we have a natural affection to where we are born, and it can be quite zealous. But for him, it's more prevalent in a monarchy, even though we find this across all peoples. But yeah, in democracy, he discusses a reflective patriotism where he says, quote, "There is another love of country more rational than instinctive patriotism, less generous, less ardent perhaps, but more fruitful and more durable. This one arises from enlightenment. It develops with the help of laws. It grows with the exercise of rights and ends up merging, in a way, with personal interest. A man understands the influence that the well-being of the country has on his own. He knows that the law allows him to contribute to bringing this well-being into being, and he interests himself in the prosperity of his country, first as something useful to him, and then as his work." Now, the context of his discussion of patriotism discusses the relationship between personal self-interest and the interests of the political community as a whole. And in this case, he often describes it as a common prosperity. And this relates to one of the most fundamental principles in politics and political theory, which is love of one's own, and certain conflicts that arise, which is the conflict between love for the common good of the city and love for one's own personal self-interest. How do you bring together love of one's own, especially amongst the rulers, and their love of the city? Or at least, how do you ensure that the self-interest of rulers doesn't take precedence in such a way that is deleterious to the prosperity of the city or the country and its common good?
Yeah, this is a question that arises throughout all different kinds of regimes, even Republican. Even if you have connected the ruler to the people by making them an elected representative, say, you are still giving them power that the average person doesn't have. And with that giving of power, there's the opportunity that comes with the abuse of power. That you could use that power to, instead of benefit your community, you could use that to enrich yourself, say.
Yeah, and the equality of conditions that a democracy allows gives one a stake in political life and social life in the attempt to attain personal prosperity and live the kind of life you want to live. And so in a democracy, citizens have a stake in the general prosperity of the country. And they recognize, right, using reason and reflection, that when the country wins, they win. When the country becomes more prosperous in general, we become more prosperous as individuals. And so you therefore have a kind of enlightened self-interest. The love of country not only begins with the awareness that a prosperous country is good for you or satisfies your own self-interest, but you're actively contributing to it through your work. However, he goes on and says, there is nothing more annoying in the experience of life than this irritable patriotism of Americans. Right. Because what he also notices is that when you criticize someone's country, they feel like you're criticizing them.
Okay.
And so any criticism kind of triggers the indignation. But after all, if you're working in such a way that you're contributing to the overall prosperity, criticizing the country kind of is a perhaps implicit criticism of you. Americans are irritating in that they really don't want America to be criticized. He says, bothers their vanity.
Well, and I would say this still persists today. Like growing up in Canada, there was definitely a stereotype about Americans, being flag-waving, sort of blindly patriotic. And then we came here, and I feel like, and maybe you share this experience, the first time that I really understood it was when we went to a Notre Dame football game, attending Notre Dame for graduate school, went to our first American college football game. And not only is it an American college football game, it's one of the biggest ones. That experience the whole weekend was just so overwhelming. It was like this mystifying. It felt remote. Like it felt like we were spectators looking in on something that was very unfamiliar to us. But then we actually went to the game, and you hear, I think they read the Declaration of Independence, or maybe it was just the Pledge of Allegiance.
They read part of the Declaration. They sang America the Beautiful.
Mm-hmm. They sang the national anthem.
Yes.
They unfurled a giant flag on the field,
Yes.
I think. They had the marching band, of course. But at the moment where they sang the national anthem, I remember it went to the line, "The land of the free," and then these, was it 2 F-16s or 3 F-16s?
Jet fighters flew over the stadium.
Yeah, they flew over the stadium, perfectly timed at that moment. It was this experience that I'd never had before. It was unique, and it seemed uniquely American, where it was like I understood what American patriotism was about. And it's funny because there's actually Stephen Fry, the actor. He did this TV show, I think, where he, toured America as an Englishman. He goes to an Alabama football game, and he's describing it as just over the top, ridiculous. These cheerleaders, the crowds, they've got like some sort of bird flying through the stadium. I don't know if it was an eagle or a hawk. And by the end of it, he had that exact same experience that I remember having, where it all came together, and he kind of was like really moved by it.
I really don't know if anything sums up America better. It's simultaneously preposterous, incredibly laughable, impressive, charming, ridiculous, expensive, overpopulated, wonderful, American.
Oh, I'm still moved thinking about it. That was a really powerful moment. I remember talking to a non-American after, and I described this scene, and they were very immediately indignant, actually. They said, "Oh, that's militarism."
Really?
Yep, like immediately. Oh, that's militarism, yeah.
One time we happened to be traveling back home from Canada, actually, through Wisconsin on July 4th. And do you remember this? When we were driving through Wisconsin, which has those rolling hills, and they're partly agricultural, so there's not a ton of trees. You get these sort of vistas that you could see the landscape from far. And we were driving through at dusk, and the fireflies came out. So you could actually see the fireflies as we were driving, and then the fireworks came out. So it was just this spectacular display of all these little neighborhood towns and all of their fireworks shows and all these local, just local people shooting off their own fireworks.
It was like hundreds across the horizon.
Oh, yeah.
Like
it was
along
nuts.
rolling hills.
I'd never seen anything like it in my life.
Yeah, and it's interesting that we mentioned the Notre Dame football game, and that might sound, oh, that's fun, but political theorists have discussed how important festivals are. Common festivals, religious holidays, and that would include sporting events. Machiavelli in The Prince talks about the need for a great prince to provide spectacles for the citizens, and Rousseau spends a lot of time discussing how festivals increase the love of country among citizens. It binds them together. And I thought I'd ask you actually a question. What do you think the role of festivals are in forming love of country?
It seems like maybe the 4th of July parade combines the instinctive and the reflective patriotism, because on the one hand, it's local. You get to see your local neighbors, businesses, religious institutions, politicians. They all come out to participate. It's the whole community. But on the other hand, yeah, there is it's a prevalence. The local parade is like your local businesses are parading, right? So there's that commercial element to it. And you get to see them. And in fact, this has had an effect on my kids. Like, oh, that dance school that's parading that local business, could I take dance classes there? Which they would have never maybe learned about that business had it not been for that. And then on the other hand, I wonder, because it is such a locally organized experience that every business is they take charge of their own float. It's not like the state gives them a float, right, to take into the parade. It's like you got to make your own, and you have to choose to participate. And I think there's probably some sort of fee that you have to pay. And the local business is paying that fee to participate in the parade. And I wonder if that brings in the reflective element, because you have to reflect to be able to do that level of organization. You have to involve the police. You have to set your route. Every aspect of governance is influenced here or is brought to bear. And so I think it is an exercise in that very administrative kind of decentralization that Tocqueville makes such a big deal of, especially when he talks about New England townships, for example.
you see free associations, such as the businesses, and political associations come together in this common activity that you can actually see are working in harmony, even if idealized. And you can see these various different groups, while pursuing their own interests, contribute to some common event that we ought to celebrate together, almost as if you see the common prosperity before you. And with the Albany Argus, what they showcase in the first paragraph are the different societies and associations and the value in that. The second point is that Tocqueville warns what happens when love of country disappears and the need to get it back, or if you can even get it back. He says there could be a situation where your country becomes just land. You don't feel an attachment to it. Customs become burdens, religion doubtful, you scorn or fear your legislators, and you don't participate in making the laws. All of this is alien or hostile to you, and therefore you don't love your country. And you descend, he says, in a sort of egoism. You're just looking out for your self-interest. So how do you get it back? And he says, you can't go back. And so he says you have to move forward. How? Well, one of the ways is that through some mechanism, you need the people to participate in political associations again. That is to say, govern oneself. One thing it does is compel citizens to see how political action affects them, and it gives them a stake and reason to reflect on the political things for their own interests and the interests of the whole. How do you do that is a different question. But one of the mechanisms is political action and political involvement to try to rekindle that love of country. And I'd like to say, too, that with Tocqueville, when he talks about political participation, he is often describing more local politics. And like we talked about last podcast, there is a tendency of the democratic citizen to think politics equals national politics. That's our spectacle today, really, is the national political theater. And we tend to forget or not think about local politics, especially sub-state politics, because we think it's boring.
Or it's too hot, so you stay home and you watch the DC fireworks rather than going to your local fireworks show.
It does, yeah, it does get hot.
Which we did not. We did not. We braved the heat, and we went out and we saw the local Greenville fireworks show.
We braved the heat. I love the heat, so I'm good with that. So Tocqueville in that chapter very eloquently describes the instinctive patriotism, reflective patriotism, and then what happens when it's gone, and one of the ways that we try to get it back.
All right. Well, I think that's a great place to stop. Thank you very much, Rob L'Arrivée.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Tocqueville Talks. This episode was produced by Audrey Enghauser. Lucy Southwell provided administrative support. The theme music is called The Girl I Left Behind Me, a popular folk song in early 19th century America, here performed by Jacob Taylor Armerding. To learn more about our lecture series and events, our Tocqueville and Beaumont Fellows programs for undergraduates, and to listen to episodes, watch event recordings, or support our work, search on Google for the Tocqueville Center at Furman University. If you enjoyed the episode, please like, subscribe, comment, and share Tocqueville Talks on all your favorite listening services. And visit our YouTube channel for full recordings of past events and episodes. Until next time, goodbye.